The land flourished because it was fed from so many sources, because it was nourished by so many cultures and traditions and peoples.
From the year 1900 to 1910, many people immigrated to the United States. Many of these that immigrated were Italian and Russian. Many Italians came from the southern areas of Italy. At the time, the south of Italy was overruled by the north, and many disasters occurred in the south. One big disaster was in 1906 when Mount Vesuvius erupted. Mount Vesuvius is the same volcano that destroyed the city of Pompeii. During the eruption, over 150,000 people fled. Out of those, many came to America. Most of the Russians that came to America at the time were Jews. The Jews were not treated fairly in Russia and were separated by the Pale of Settlement from the non-Jew Russians. The Jews had very poor lives in the Pale and were persecuted by the other Russians. Many Russians decided that they couldn't live in Russia anymore. Both Italians and Russians had hard lives, and that is why they came to America, for a better life. Most immigrants came over by boat, which were often long, hard rides, and arrived at Ellis Island in New York, where they went through a series of tests to see if they could be helpful to the growing country. Some made it through, and others were taken back to the country they came from. Some families came together, but others could not afford to all come at once. Families often got separated at Ellis Island because some made it through and others in the family did not. If they made it through Ellis Island, they often went to communities like Little Italy, where the others in the communities immigrated from the same place and had the same culture and traditions. Most that immigrated to America left many of their possessions at home and had very little money. They often moved into small apartment-like buildings called tenements, which had little space and were dark. The tenements got hot because everyone was close together and they didn't have any air conditioning like we have today. Immigrants at the time had to work long hours and got little pay. They worked in dangerous conditions and were treated unfairly by their bosses. Many immigrants worked in the garment industry. The Triangle Shirtwaist Fire and the strikes of the Progressive Era changed the lives of many and opened their eyes to making fair pay and work hours and changing the laws about fire safety. The Progressive Era held many strikes. Some were for safer working conditions, better pay, or shorter work hours. In the garment industry, people would be crammed together in rooms lined with sewing machines. One of the buildings was the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. They were famous for making triangle shirtwaists. Triangle shirtwaists were a type of blouse where the waist was in a triangular shape. The owners of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory were Max Blank and Isaac Harris, who started the business to make money because the garment industry at the time was a popular way to make money. Most of the workers at the factory worked 6 days a week and got about $6 a week. They had to work hard, and the managers sometimes moved the clocks back to get more time out of the workers. Sometimes workers cut their fingers with sewing machines. If they broke a needle or ruined a shirtwaist, it would subtract from their weekly pay. If they didn't finish a shirtwaist, they might have to bring it home and finish it. When the clock hit the hour, they would go to the door where they would be searched to make sure they were not stealing anything. After a while, people got tired of the working conditions and needed more money to buy the things they needed. Other shops had gone on strike, and the workers of the factory decided it was their turn. On November 23, 1909, the Triangle workers went on strike. They stopped working at the factory and protested their issues. In many strikes in the garment industry, the bosses hired thugs to beat up the strikers. Many strikers were hauled to jail and held in court. The Triangle strikers grouped with Local 25. Local 25 helped the strikers quite a bit. By January 1910, the strikers were running down and needed money, but they held on strong. Eventually, the owners of the factory gave in and paid higher pay and charged lower work hours. The workers had won at last, but that was not the last of their worries. On March 25, 1911, at 4:40 p.m. at the Ash Building in Manhattan, the Triangle Shirtwaist Company workers were working on their jobs when a fire broke out on the 8th floor of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. It spread into the floors 9 and 10. Many rushed down one staircase to find the door at the bottom locked to make sure no one snuck out with something, and either burned or suffocated to death by the fire. Others chose another staircase, which was which was not locked, but opened inward, and with the weight of all the people, the door could not get opened. Some eventually got through the door. Some chose the one out of the 4 elevators that worked, which could not fit many people, but they crammed in, and after a few runs, the cables broke, and those in the elevator came crashing down the shaft. After the elevator fell, some tried to slide down the cables, but slipped down the shaft, while others made it successfully down. People started jumping out of the windows, even though people shouted, "Don't jump." Others, along with Max Blank and Isaac Harris, were more fortunate and were on the top floor and could get out of the building, get onto the top of the building, and get onto the roof of a nearby building. By the time the fire department got there, many were already dead. Their ladders weren't very much help because they only reached the 6th floor. Their nets couldn't stop the bodies of those jumping from 8 and 9 stories up because they would just be ripped out of the men's hands under the weight of the falling bodies. Their hoses were rusted up and took a while to turn on. In the end, 146 people died from the fire. After the fire, the owners of the factory were convicted of manslaughter. Following the Shirtwaist fire came many new laws. Some laws came from other fires also. One law was that public buildings have to have out-opening doors because people cannot open doors if everyone is pushing on it, and it opens inward, like in the Triangle Fire. Another law is that there needs to be multiple unlocked exits for if a door is blocked by the fire. The fire also led to working at the needs of workers in companies. The Triangle Shirtwaist Fire was a big tragedy but led to much triumph, such as better working conditions. Immigration in the early 1900s had many triumph and tragedy views, and the strikes of the Progressive era started as a tragedy but ended in triumph. Early immigration, the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, and the Progressive era strikes changed America forever, changed people's perspectives, and pulled people out of the shadows.